As we move in to this final session that I invite you back to listen to some expert speakers that we have, I want you to think about getting involved in community climate action. You're already here, you're engaged. We're going to hear from two presenters, because I believe the last one's dropped out, so it gives me a little bit more time to talk and sum up at the end. But also, in reality, it will give us a bit of more opportunity for discussion and maybe engagement. And please, I encourage you to continue using the chat room as you hear from our next two presenters. They're going to try to inspire you to try different ways of engaging with your communities, with the climate, and to highlight opportunities, support and engage in our area. So first of all, can I ask Jean-Mathieu from Climate for Change to come to the floor? Would you introduce yourself? Just tell us a little bit about you, and then please proceed as you would like. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah? Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much. So I'm actually from SCAN, Scottish Communities Climate Action Network. We run that project called Climate for Change, which I'm going to tell you about in a second. So, I mean, I heard a bit about the conversation about the ripple effects, which is brilliant, because that's all about really what we want to do with that program. Right, to make that not too boring, I'll try to, so how many of you, if you can give me a show of hands, are already doing some work around engaging your community through conversations around climate change, doing some sort of climate cafe or any kind of climate literacy work in your community? Either a show of hands or a yes in the chat or whatever. All right, I've got a few there on the screen. Great, thank you. That's at least half, I would say. So that's brilliant. Thank you. So effectively what it's about, I'm going to share my screen actually. I've got a wee presentation. Right. I assume you can see that? Yes, okay, thank you, Janet. So, so a little bit about me. So I'm the Training and Engagement Manager at SCAN. So SCAN stands for the Scottish Communities Climate Action Network. So we're a network of community groups all around Scotland who are working to tackle climate change and who are working with their communities. We also have individual members for whom we provide kind of events, training opportunities, but mostly originally we were set up in 2013 out of the End of Climate Challenge funding. And so we're a network. So the idea is that we try to encourage as much as possible peer-to-peer learning and exchange of ideas and networking. This year, we've had the chance to get some government funding to run two different major programs. So one of them is the regional networks. So you may have seen that on the SCAN website. We have been recruiting 11 regional network coordinators whose role will be to kind of get local groups together and expand on the learnings and expertise of each of these groups. Potentially, they will evolve into the regional climate hubs that the Scottish government has been talking about. So that's one stream of activities that we're developing with government funding. And the other one has been the Climate for Change program. And Climate for Change, basically 3 years ago, we identified from Australia a program that they had been running all about engaging people with climate change and people who didn't necessarily engage with the topic. So that's where it caught our attention, and we saw also the results was quite positive and quite engaging. So as it says, it's basically community conversations and action for the climate emergency. And the idea is that we're creating that social climate for change in Scotland. So with kind of about 10 years of funding from the Climate Challenge Fund, some of you might be aware of, there has been a great focus in Scotland around behaviour change and encouraging community members to change their behavior. While we recognize that it's very key and important, we also want to acknowledge the fact that without kind of legislation and government action, behavior changes rendered very difficult, especially for people who are maybe concerned about the climate emergency, but not really committed. And that's really what this program is all about. It's about engaging with people who are concerned about climate change, but not committed. And really, Ipsos surveys have shown that the majority of people in Scotland fall into that category. They're concerned, but not committed to take action. And so this program sprung from this realization. And yeah, it springs from the premise that collectively we all have the knowledge and solutions to stop and reverse climate change, but what we need is the social and political will to do so. So why conversations? Well, we know from social research that we process information and we get a lot of information from media and social media, and but we tend to take action around the information that we collect through conversations. So conversation plays a huge part in terms of absorbing the information and doing something about it. So while mass media such as news, social media and campaigns are key to raising awareness of issues and shaping the public sentiment around them, we need to turn that momentum into a deep, lasting individual and social change, a commitment basically to concrete action. And it takes people, it takes basically conversations between people who trust one another. And the element of trust is a key part of the program. So what the Climate for Change Australia organization has found out, and what we're beginning to find out, because we've only run the program since March 2020, so only a few months, we have about 7 or 8 conversations under our belt, so to speak, and we've engaged with approximately 70 people so far. But what they have found is that it has had quite a big impact. So 3 in 4 attendees of the climate conversation were not yet taking regular action on climate change at the time of the conversation, but 3 months after, this number was basically split in half. So 1 in 2 attendees was taking regular action. Those numbers also are very interesting. The impact of the conversations in general. Basically, 99% of attendees learned something new, and 46% contacted their elected representative more frequently. 86% left more empowered to take action on climate change, and 54% volunteered more regularly to climate organization. So yes, how we do it. So the idea, and that's why I mentioned the ripple effect. We all know that we've got, we're not just acting as individuals, but we also have an effect into our close network, whether friends, family, or community members, and what we do has an impact on other people. And perhaps actions speak louder than words, in a sense. And so the way we do it is there are 2 different roles in a climate conversation. There is a facilitator and the host, and those are distinct roles. And the role of the facilitator is basically to run through, to basically do the guided discussion. So discussion starts with a personal account, personal story of the facilitator. Why did they come to become a facilitator? And that is punctuated by moments of realization. What emotions did they feel at the time, and then actions. And so there's a small section which is very impactful, which is the personal story of the person. And luckily, we'll hear back later on from Joanna and Casca from another strand of work at SCAN around the work of our story circle. And we know that stories and emotions are very key to changing people's attitudes and action towards climate change. So with that recognition, we start with a kind of facilitator stories, and then we move on to a short video which kind of sets the scene. What is climate change, the cause and effects, but again keeping it kind of down to earth. And followed from that video, the facilitator will have a guided discussion to talk about how is everybody feeling, what can we do about it, and then really guide the discussion towards a point where we want to all the participants to realize that although all parts of society are needing to take changes, whether it's businesses, communities, government plays also a key part. And so the host, sorry, I'll just finish on so the facilitator at the end, it leads to, while there has been this discussion and a lot of emotions have been triggered, the discussion ends with a number of calls to action. And those are very important because we know that discussions about climate change can be quite depressing, and can, especially if somebody is new to this information, or they are not maybe realizing the scale of the issue, it might feel quite overwhelming. So one way to kind of funnel that energy in positive ways is to invite people to take action. And so we've got a number of actions. One of them is to start engaging with local representatives. Another one is to join a local community group and start volunteering and taking action. Another one might be to host a conversation to carry on that ripple effect and spreading the word. So while this is a one-off event, we know that we want to use the kind of power of community to expand the awareness of climate change. So we're potentially looking at setting up local climate cafes where beyond that one-off conversation, there could be some sort of support group and action group to carry on that discussion. So that's on the side of the facilitator. But then the host is basically the person who invites the person. Yes. So the host is asked to invite their friends, their families, their close circles, or it could be also a community member if it's if the conversation is happening in the context of a community group. And the reason for that, again, we go back to this idea of we tend to change our behaviors and attitudes and perspectives when we have conversations with people we trust. So this is the model, and at each conversation, we aim to have about 2 hosts who want to host the next conversation, which again, exponentially, as you can see, if you get 2 hosts from each conversation, then the kind of discussions around climate change grows pretty much exponentially. We also realized that asking people to contact their MPs and MSPs, although it might be very invaluable, there might be a few barriers that people are finding, and one of them might be the thinking that perhaps it is not the most effective way, and perhaps it ends up being the email or the contact methods might just end up going to a black hole of emails. So we've had some requests from participants who said they wanted to actually have some sort of support group because they thought it was a big step for them to engage with their local elected representatives. And so we are going to start that, to start with online, but eventually, and through our regional networks, we might end up having a lot of local MP and MSP engagement groups for people to join and to support each other into starting a conversation with their local representative. So that is the idea. In terms of opportunities that we can offer at SCAN, so we already have trained a number of facilitators. So we've got 15 trained facilitators, and we're training another 15 in May, and hopefully another 15 in June. We haven't advertised for it yet. So the facilitator training is basically split into about 12 hours of content, training content. And once you're trained, you can basically facilitate those conversations. It's very thorough and very interesting in terms of all the skills that one gets while going through the training. Of course, because we already have those 15 facilitators, they're ready to kind of deliver conversations. So they can do that either online on Zoom or in person, which is even better. And so if your organization or community is interested in hosting a conversation, we can certainly match you with a local facilitator, and they can do that with you. The conversation is about 2.5 hours, the length of the conversation. Before the pandemic, all conversations happened around a meal, but again, this completely depends on the host. It can be with a meal, with tea and coffee, or it can be just a get-together. When it's online, of course, it is a little bit less convivial. So again, we have this idea of the MSP and MP engagement groups that we are setting up. If you're interested in knowing more about it, or joining them or spreading the word about them, you can email me. That's my email address there, C4C. We also have, we are also going to start a monthly online climate conversation. So that will be open to any member of the public, but limited to 10 people. The idea with the conversation is to have a space which is not too big, where people can feel comfortable sharing their views and sharing ideas. So we won't exceed 10 people for each conversation. And again, that's the ideal number for hosting a conversation. So those are all the opportunities that we have as part of the Climate for Change program. However, with Climate for Change, we also have a number of training opportunities that we can offer, either online, and that is throughout the SCAN membership, or that is that can be bespoke as well. So there can be things like fundraising, training, facilitating deliberative processes, the art of asking, training, and I know that the storytelling circle will have other training opportunities. So if you are interested, again, be in touch with me. This is something we offer for free to our SCAN members. So if you are not a SCAN member, you can become. This is also free to any community group in Scotland. And if you have other training needs, we're also interested to hear more about them, so we can cater for those needs. So that is me. I hope that this was useful, but I think more the question and answer part is always more interesting in an event, because I just joined the event and I'm not sure where you're all from, but I'd be very keen to answer some questions and get to know you more. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Jean-Mathieu. I'm going to open this to the floor. Are there any questions? I'm just looking through in our chat. There isn't any there, but you've got an opportunity to actually use your hands up button if you wanted to actually ask yourself. And could I ask you, Jean-Mathieu, can you just post in our chat any links that you raised, just so we've got those coming through? So Lizzie Williams, I can see your hands raised there. Do you want to unmute and come in?
Yes, thank you. That sounds like an amazing suite of things. Thank you. And I just wanted to clarify how it works. So if I was a host and I would ask a trained facilitator to come along, and then would I find a room full of people who I know, and I know that they are concerned about climate change but not committed to action, and I would lure them into my house and because they would have to be kind of up for being converted to the cause, wouldn't they? I mean, how does that bit work?
Yeah, so you're asking basically, how does a host extend the invitation to their circles? Yes. Yeah, good question. Well, I mean, the idea is that you are again, going back from the data that we've gathered from Ipsos, is most people are interested about the issue, and but they are not necessarily knowing, you know, what to do about it, or how to progress, or if they can do anything about it, really. So the idea from the host side, the idea is to just extend the invitation, be transparent about it. I've, you know, saying something like, well, I've come across this organization who is providing that opportunity to have a discussion about climate change and what one can do about it. Putting that event together, hoping that you can join. It's basically just asking people to turn up, and most people, you know, find the social opportunity a good excuse to kind of come along. Yeah, this is kind of, every host will have their own style of extending the invitation. I would like to add also that the idea is not to invite any climate deniers. You know, the idea is not to, I don't know if you're familiar, Lizzie, with the social diffusion curve, where you've got, you know, you've got the early adopters, you've got the, so the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. And the idea is that you always go to the next in line. So you're not going to try to reach the climate denier and to convert them. You want to get to people who are kind of next in line, so who are just on the brink of taking action. So so that's where the ask is made a bit easier, you know, and yeah. So I hope that kind of answer your question a bit.
Excellent. Who have I got next? I don't know who came up next, but Meryl, I've got your hand up there. Could you come in, if that's okay?
Yes, I was just wondering how you go about finding your facilitators. Are you trying to work on a regional level and getting facilitators from different regions of Scotland, or how are you doing that? Yes,
so we started, we've got our SCAN newsletter, we've got about 2,500 recipients. So we've started with our SCAN members and the recipients of the SCAN newsletter. We have had quite a high take up. So at the start, we selected facilitators. So there's a kind of short expression of interest form, and then which kind of, you know, it has a biography. So we want to know why people want to join in, and we selected people according to geography. I must say we're not there yet, because we do have quite a few gaps in some parts of Scotland, particularly, I mean, in West Ross, we don't have too many facilitators, I must admit, amongst the 15. So yeah, basically at the minute it's very much based on geography that we select participants. We still have a backlog, but as you can imagine, in the Central Belt we've got a lot more demand. But yeah, through word of mouth, through presentations like this, you know, people who pass the word, that's basically how we've been spreading the word about the facilitator training. Thank you, Meryl, for the question.
I've also got Elaine and Gary. Jack, your hands are up if you'd like to come in, please.
Yeah, sounds a great scheme. I missed the very beginning of it, unfortunately. Is it a government-funded scheme, did you say, John?
Yes, it is government-funded. So we're in the pilot phase very much, because the first phase was all about taking all that material from Climate for Change Australia and adapting it to the Scottish context. So it is government-funded until the end of March 2023 for now. If we make a success out of it, of course, it might be extended, and our intention is to very much blend it with the regional networks, which might evolve into climate hubs. So if the take-up is good, and if it's incorporated within those regional climate hubs, who knows, there might be, yeah, an ongoing program.
Right. No, my only concern about it being government funded was your objective to go back to MPs and try and get them involved in the climate change. It just sounds like a conflict of interest if they're funding it and then you're going back to try and change their minds.
Well, the idea is not necessarily we don't really have, apart from pushing the climate agenda, which the Scottish government is, I mean, the ambition is to reach net zero by 2045 and 75% of emission reduction, as you might know, by 2030, which is very ambitious. So they're very much on board with taking action. And with the background of the Scotland's Climate Assembly, our idea is not necessarily to kind of lobby or be confrontational about it, but really to increase engagement and the active citizenship. So we want people to start engaging with their local representative rather than, you know, we don't view it as kind of a signing petition or kind of an effort to push a particular policy. We just want people to engage with their local representative more on the issue of the climate emergency. So the Scottish government is aware about that, and they're happy with kind of this empowerment aspects.
Mm. It's just that I write to my MPs, well, various MPs, probably 2 or 3 times a week about various issues, and most of them don't get addressed, and you get a standard generic letter back. So I'm just wondering how successful that's likely to be, or do you have successes already that's proving that the scheme is working?
Not yet. We don't have the success yet because that's pretty recent. But we have stories where we're engaging with local representatives have worked. We've got some stories from Stirling where people got together to talk to their MSPs about road development, and that was going to basically cut historical trees and disrupt a whole neighborhood, and they were successful in doing that. So so we've got some success stories. Yes, I assume, you know, that that's one of the concerns that was voiced around the idea of, you know, sending an email from a template and you just get an automatic response and you don't hear back and you really don't know if it has had an effect or not. So this is also why we are developing those engagement support group to see, yeah, it's work in progress basically.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Gary. Eileen, your hand's up now, and I'll make this the last question before we move on to the next speaker.
It's Aileen, actually.
Oh, Aileen, sorry.
It's okay. My question to Jean-Mathieu is about the monthly online climate conversation. Is that open to anyone? Because I thought of maybe putting a link or putting some information up on our Climate Face Facebook page, just if somebody in the village wanted to join in. Is that the sort of person you want to join in, or?
Absolutely. I mean, the idea is that it's open to anybody and everybody. So yes, I'll put the link in the chat to that one. I mean, we only have a few spaces left because it's you know, it goes out to everybody, and we want to have a conversation, so it will be only 10 people in the room. However, if you wanted to, for example, host a conversation in your village, that's something we can also arrange. But I'll certainly put the link in the chat, and yeah, basically, if anybody is interested in taking the conversation forward, or seeing how they can get involved, or setting something in their area, I put my email in the chat, and I'd be very happy to chat more. Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you very much for those questions, and Jean-Mathieu for answering them so well and putting the links in the chat room. I know that Fiona's got a leftover a post that she's put into the chat room as well that you can read on the side there, but I'm going to hand over to Joanna Avilori, who's going to give us our next talk. Joanna, would you just introduce yourself and explain what you're going to share with us this afternoon? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. So my name is Joanna, and together with Casca, here we are Scan Story Weavers. So we work in a different area of communicating community climate action and climate change, that is through stories. So both fictional stories and non-fictional stories. The power that stories have, you know, like Jean-Mathieu just said, and we talked about it here as well in the morning, that stories have to convey messages to all sorts of people because you are communicating between the lines. So you can talk about climate change and the climate emergency to people who perhaps are not very engaged with it. And if you just say, oh, look at this story, like you want to read it, want to listen to this podcast episode, and it might be an easier way of engaging people who are not very engaged, and to also strengthening the communication with people who are already engaged with the issue. So it's a bit harder to measure the impact that the stories have, and how many, and you really need, it takes time, because it emerged through time, the power that a story that you've heard or that you listened to or that you read has in changing your beliefs. But it was through several sets of stories that we got to the lifestyle that we have now in different cultures. So stories in culture, as in like in arts, in culture of our spirituality, our religions, and even in our culture, in the advertising and in the commodities of life. So all of these stories made us be the way we are, behave the way that we behave. So we believe that is also through showing and telling alternative stories that we can begin to suggest that people can change their minds and their beliefs and their values about the world that we live in and how we connect to it. So I'm going to put a little presentation. We're going to actually show you some stories and not just talking. So can I share my screen? Share my screen, yes. Okay. So the Storytellers Collective within SCAN, we are an emerging group of Scotland-based storytellers, and we are using our creativity to amplify stories of community-led climate action. We're going to show you how the stories can look like on the page and on the podcast, on your ear. We have the ambition to engage wider audiences in conversations around their concrete visions for a beautiful and irresistible change that can inspire our communities around Scotland. So is this vision, this imagination, and there's more power to our imagination than what we see in the news and what we read on social media every day that can be very gloomy. But imagining a sustainable future and in planting these ideas in our own minds and on other people's minds that can spring this innovation and maintenance that we really need. So somewhere where we share these stories is in our podcast, 1,000 Better Stories. We share stories of community-led climate action in Scotland and help us all imagine a better future beyond this new normal that everyone is talking about now. So you can listen to the podcast on Podbean, on Apple and Google. So there's lots of different places where you can listen to the podcast. And I'm going to hand it on to Casca, who is the podcast story queen, and who will share also some specific stories that we shared this year. So over to you, Casca.
Thanks, Joanna. I'm just going to share my sound. So I was very sad to have missed the beginning of this meeting because it sounded really exciting, but I was delivering one of our workshops in the morning, and I'm hoping there's a recording of it I can watch back. But I wanted to share some of the audio stories that we have been sharing with everybody, mostly through the podcast, but through other ways as well. And to kick us off, I'll just play you our podcast introduction.
1,000 better
1,000 better stories.
Can everybody hear me? Or the story?
Welcome to 1,000 Better Stories, the Scottish Communities Climate Action Network's podcast, sharing stories of community-led climate action in Scotland to help us all imagine a better and fairer future beyond the new normal and transform what we think is possible.
So that's our podcast intro, and it just repeats what Joanna so eloquently said about inspiring each other through sharing the stories. And what we do it's a monthly podcast at the moment. We've been running it for a while, so there's lots and lots of material in there of stories from communities and projects, and as well as individuals, which hopefully showcase the glimpses of that future we all want to for everybody to happen. And we often are able to help tell your stories, your community stories, your project stories, your personal stories by just interviewing you. And if we're lucky, we get to come to you on location and interact with more people than just the project manager. And that's our favorite kind of story, where we hear lots of different voices. But we also want, through the Storytelling Collective, we're inviting other people to contribute audio stories to that space. And we've got mini grants to help people produce the stories. And even if you're not particularly, if you're just doubling with audio production or you're just a beginner, this is a nice way of sort of seeing whether you can tell a story using audio, and we do have lots of workshops to help you do this. And the reason we're inviting lots of people to share their stories, because we want to really showcase the real diversity of voices that are out there from people who are taking action on climate, or who are sort of struggling with making a change. And we want it, to be representative geographically, economically, ethnically, generationally, to put it delicately, and also to produce stories with different genres. So bring in creative element. We do like telling a sort of nice case study story, nice journalistic reportage, but we also think that creative approaches can be really powerful, a way of engaging people in this work. So I'm just going to play you a couple of examples of stuff that sort of came out from people submitting their stories through the mini grant program, and just to show you the range of people that we're getting through this work. And the first one is amazing, and these are not published yet. So yeah, you have a proper preview of the stories, and they're just going to be little teasers. And I'm hoping that's going to intrigue you enough to listen to the full story once it's published. So the first one is something that I just got in my mailbox last week, and it's been submitted by the Moffat Theatre, which is a youth theatre who have just developed an idea of a new podcast based on our funding and funding from others. So hopefully it's going to be nice to showcase their work on our podcast, but I'm hoping that we may be able to help them host it and spread the word about it, because it sounds fascinating, and it's a very important voice of young generation that we all need to hear. So I'm just going to play that for you. Oh, hang on.
Hi, welcome to Blank Generation, where we bring together young activists to talk about what matters to us. We'll share new points of view, ask what we want the future to look like, and see how we can make that happen. We're your hosts. I'm Ben.
And I'm Emily. In this episode, we'll talk about what young activists are doing to get past the feelings of isolation and disconnection in rural Scotland. Before we get into this episode, we'd like to thank our sponsors, the 2050 Climate Group, Moffat and District Community Council, and SCAN, the Scottish Community Climate Action Network. Let's get into it.
So, a few months ago, as a part of my membership of the Green Party, I received an email inviting me to attend an event at a botanical garden in Gatehouse of Fleet, and it sounded interesting, and I thought I would look into going. So I had a look, and as it turns out, it's a 40-minute drive to Gatehouse of Fleet, which seems reasonable. But then when I looked up to go using public transport, I found that it would take me 2.5 hours to get there by bus, which ruled out my going. And I think that just really serves to show how political organisation and activism are impeded by the lack of provision of transport in this region.
Mm-hmm. It's that feeling that we are unable to be an actual member of society because of the place that we live. We are rural, and so we are entirely separated from any form of quote-unquote real life. Everything is based in bigger towns and bigger cities, and it's constantly supported in the way that we see our bus travel and just general public transport not functioning in the way that it's supposed to.
So that's just a teaser of a 12-minute story, and I hope they're going to produce more episodes. They're certainly keen to do that. The podcast is called Blank Generation, which is quite stark, isn't it? So that was the voice of the youth. Another story I thought you might be interested in hearing a little bit of, and that one's actually already published. No, actually, it's not published yet, so it's going to be coming out soon. It's a story from Luke Winter, and the sound production is by Loris Sored. And this is a story of Luke's visit to Neustadt Peninsula, so quite a remote area, as you know, and a unique sort of ownership by the community or community projects in there. So he just explored it one summer and recorded lots of impressions and interviews. And I'm just going to play you a little bit of that too.
Right, man, I hope you get this. Hope you're on WhatsApp. So I'll do my best. From Jacobite times right back to the Act of Union, along with the Highland clearances, something the British government did would be just hand some of the Highlands to some English lord or some Scottish lord. You know, what like the British Empire does, just carves up the country, regardless of who lives there, and hands it to one of their pals. And the response to that was often, you know, Highlanders would take arms and raid the new laird's house and try and take it back, or would just steal his shit. You know, these land raids, they became known, started way back Jacobite times, but the last one in the country, I think, that I know of, was Neustadt in the 1920s or 30s.
So I'm going to leave you there, leave you hanging, because I think it's a 20-minute, just over 20 minutes of quite powerful storytelling with a lovely sound production and lots of voices from the community as well. So that's our, you know, stories that are produced for the podcast, and you can see there's different voices, different formats, and different ideas shared in there. But the thing that got us excited recently is ability to layer all these stories, sound stories, and maybe visual stories onto the landscape in order to sort of connect the stories with the place much more directly, and using audio tours or sound walking tours. And I've just come out of a workshop that I was leading, our first edition of this workshop, of showing people how to use these audio tours for storytelling. And I, you know, in terms of this meeting is about Ross Biosphere, and sort of bioregions and biospheres and sort of spaces like that. It's sort of it to me, it's a perfect sort of way of then showcasing your place, not just the nature, but also the type of projects you've got, and maybe putting some more creative stories in there as well. So I'm just going to show you a story that I've created as part of a team in Tayport in Fife. So this is actually a walking tour you can take in the future, in year 2030, which we all know is a critical year for climate action, or as they say, like watershed year. And it's an app you can take on your phone and walk around, and the stories that just start playing in your ear as soon as you reach any of these points on the map. which I'm not sure what it's doing. So any of these stops on the map. So you do it with usually your mobile device, but you can also view this stuff online. So I just wanted to play a tiny little excerpt from that tour of the future in Tayport, and that was based on the visioning we did as a community last year, based on this what if framework that Transition came up with. So it's community visions combined into an imagined future. So let us listen for a second.
Stop 3, a splash in the Tay. Stand for a moment and feel the warm waters of the Tay around your feet. The tidal pool has been restored and you're enjoying paddling in the shallows while other brave souls venture out to its edges. Rising sea temperatures mean there's a few jellyfish about, but the lifeguard has given the all clear, so you're tempted to go in a little further. All around you, kids are having fun while the serious swimmers plough on. The salty waters are health-giving and invigorating. You linger, watching the kayaks, paddleboarders, rowers and sailboats gently, quietly drift by. Thankfully, anything with an engine like jet skis or speedboats are now banned from the river. You might spy the discreet new district heat pump emerging from the waters nearby. It will soon supply all Tayport's heating needs. A lot of the families here today will have come from the award-winning eco-housing development opposite the Canny Peart FC Tayport's football ground.
I'll just stop there. You can, I'll share this link in the chat, so you can explore this space all by yourself after we stop.
Thank you, Casca. That's excellent. That in terms of the speakers, we'd missed that last speaker, but you filled in that nice slot, and sharing that insight into the way that could come through is fantastic. Can I just thank?
Got a couple of.
Yeah, we're not done yet.
We're not done yet, Kevin.
Oh, right.
Right.
Well, Casca, can I just get you to keep an eye on to the time then, if that's all right? Just
sorry about that.
Okay, I'll just finish our presentation sharing a couple more stories that showcase the fictional side of our work with our blog. So I'll try to be brief. I hope that we can read them through. We're going to share this presentation in the end anyway, so you can go through in your own time. So we also have a blog where we share fiction and non-fiction short stories of real and projected events that tell the changes that we hope to see in our communities and in our environments. And I'm going to show you two very short excerpts of two stories that also came from the mini grants that we offered. So the egg hunters, this is in our blog, and this is just the start, the first paragraph of the story by Gazelle Buchholz. Gazelle is a brilliant writer. She's a fictional writer. She published in Danish, and now she's starting to write in English as well. So like me, she's a bilingual writer. And this is the story that she submitted for our blog called The Egg Hunters. And I'm going to read out a passage for you. Theodore, it doesn't work. The eggs keep drifting away, says Doreen, as she stands by the wide living room window and looks out at the pouring rain in the garden. The water had created miniature streams that run across the borders between neighboring gardens. Perhaps a fox ran away with them, he suggests, absent-minded as his attention is bound to his work documents scattered around on the dining table and conveniently distracting him from the infinite downpour. A fox wouldn't be that smart. It would only go for real eggs, Doreen concludes monotonously. She says in the same tone, we ought to do something about the waters, perhaps installing something to retain it. She says with a gaze fixed on the outside world. When he looks up from the table, his eyes meet the back of her head. We could, but I doubt it would be any help as long as the rain constantly buckets down. There seems to be no end to it, he concludes, and his attention returns to the papers on the table. But what else can we do? Her hesitant question hangs in the air. She gathers herself and sums up the daily statement, which is identical to the previous day. The news are found that the rain is here to stay. There's no weather clearance in sight. She pauses before capitulating. I'd better call Maren. The kids will be devastated when they hear that Easter hunt is cancelled. Loreen sighs and reaches out for her phone, worrying how her grandchildren will receive the news about the tradition's termination. So you can read a full story in our blog. That's just the introduction to the egg hunters. And I will read another passage from another written story that we received with the mini grants. This is a poem written by, created by Erin and Emir. They are a collective called Karna that use myth and folk and Celtic folk to tell the stories about the environment and community climate action and climate justice. The illustration, just like Gazelle, was also made by them. So this is the first part of the whole poem that you can read in our blog. So the story is called Nem Talamir, and Nem, the sky, is the first poem. Nem, the sky, the joint eater. Lifting from the bog just above the earth, where the honeybee's hives and the spider spins his thread. There, the fairy mounds are found, swelling from the land. She drops from the veil of the morning, seeking some forgotten crumbs, whilst the children of men are at play. She gallops on wings, lifting the sky with lightness of being, the tender curiosity as she finds a lost corner of shortbread, the golden pound of whiskey, at the bottom of a glass left out for her to find, among the occasional greed of men, the crackles, the baby talk. So that was the start of the poem. You can read the rest in our blog. And just a brief note on how you can involve with our circle and with our work with the Storytellers Collective, but also with the Story Circle. So like Kaska said, you can take part in the training and the skill shares about storytelling for change in various formats. So we have training for podcasting, we have training for writing, we will have training for video, for filmmaking as well soon. You can help deliver in training and Skillshare. So if you are a storyteller, if you are working with any of these mediums, you can approach us and say, I would like to deliver a training on this topic, on this skill. You can contribute with content. Like we said, we have many grants available for that if you need to be paid to do your project. If that isn't stopping you from telling your story, then we do have these mini grants of £250 available to support you and your community. And you can also join you can join our story circle to guide our work. So you can also suggest what can we do with this topic of stories and communicating climate change. So we have some upcoming workshops and skill shares that you can check on your own time. Like I said, we'll share this presentation. We have one skill share coming up on the 7th of June for writers. You don't have to be a professional writer. You can just be interested. If you are a writer or writing or interested in writing on these topics, you can come to these skill shares starting on the 7th of June. And yeah, and you can get in touch with us for any other questions. I hope that I didn't go over my time. Thank you so much.
That's okay.
Kevin.
Well, the time was okay because we lost that last speaker. But what I'd like to do now is open this to the audience to ask any questions. There's been some chats, and I can see that Kaska's been helpfully answering those questions. Again, Joanna, Kaska, if there's anything you want to post there link-wise that people can take away, please do. But do we have any raised hands, any questions that come through from the floor?
So I just popped the link for the full presentation on the chat. So all of the links that we have there and the QR codes, you can check on your own time. Yeah.
Just to bring out the questions that were being asked in the chat, it was about how easy is it to use that audio tool app. It's really easy. So we're just finished running a workshop with people who are not, some of them were not particularly technically minded, and they commented very specifically like, this is easy to use. And we're going to run this workshop again at least once. We're just planning our workshop series, so we'll look out for that on Eventbrite. Or we can just, if you're interested or your organization is interested in sort of maybe running something specific, much more bespoke project, workshop or training, especially if you want to learn how to record and edit audio as well as produce audio audio tours, we can have a chat about that too.
That's fantastic. There isn't any questions coming up there, but I was going to ask one around, we talked about bilingual, and I just thought, well, the Gaelic culture was actually one which was very much embodied in the land and the landscape and the seascape. And in a way, maybe the biggest crime in our modern social construct is that we've lost that embedded knowledge of our spaces that become places through the way that we interact with the environment. Is there a Gaelic aspect to that storytelling that you're introducing, especially in that part of the world?
If people, we don't have any specific design to, like there isn't a project to specifically bring Gaelic stories to life, but obviously that would be such an obvious project for somebody to maybe help out with and showcase that side of things. So mini grants are in there for that specific purpose. So yes,
Yeah,
please.
no, I think I'll just put a plug there, because I know that from my time in Westeros, I mean, one thing that the local dialect is being lost, and we were trying to establish a song circle where people could come and hear those old stories, but also the narrative. And maybe there's an opportunity to not only share a story around a challenge that we're facing now, but draw from the past, but keep a language alive. And I mean, I just sow that seed for you, but maybe
that sounds like a great project that would work with audio tour setting beautifully, actually. So if anybody's got you know, interest in taking it forward from Westeros, that would be fantastic.
Okay, I can't see any other questions coming up there, but I've got another seed that I'll put in there, which was we worked with storytellers who were using participatory research when I was in View again, trying to get people to see that actually the most biodiverse landscapes are often the cultural landscapes that we create. The garden, interestingly, where we brought exotic species from someplace else, but they provided a diversity in habitat. But some of the most poorest for diversity were the things that people perceived as wilderness. The landscape inland overgrazed and poached and washed away. And yet the real wilderness that we have left is actually our seascape, the littoral zone, in that drawdown zone and around it, which often people again overlook. So again, there is an opportunity to weave biodiversity, people's perceptions, climate change and resilience into a narrative which could be a new walking transect, where you take people from, you know, places they feel comfortable to places they feel less comfortable. We did that as a research project, but the guy went over to Switzerland, so I've left, he's gone and that legacy's gone. But I always thought it was so powerful. I was really moved. Yeah. Anyway, just put those things there. Okay. Can I see any questions coming through? I can't at the moment, but I just thank you again. I think Joanna Casca, that was fantastic presentations there, and Jean-Mathieu as well. Together collectively, you've really brought it quite round. Oh, I've got two questions come up. Zoe, I'll give you the first one. Do you want to come in at that point?
I was just clapping.
Oh, it's a clap. Okay. And okay, so it's a clap. So you know, I thought they were coming in, and there's love hearts there as well. And it is absolutely a fantastic afternoon session. What I'm going to do now is just try to attempt to wrap up this day. It's really difficult, and I've been trying to type and also listen and engage with you all to do you justice. And I think today we've heard that there is a really viable alternative to the linear economy that takes, makes, uses and wastes, as we've seen a symptom in the main stream of society in Scotland and elsewhere. One that has moved away from local production, that instead is transported to someplace else to feed our hungry cities through a long supply chain that's reliant upon grants to send food and fibre from Westeros to someplace else and import fuel, construction materials and consumer products in return. Natasha Hutchinson this morning eloquently framed the Biosphere Reserve in the context of its work to date and its potential to be used as a lever for funding, an offer as a collective voice to go with things that you all think are really important to those community leaders and government leaders that can be influenced, and provide a safe space to network and share good practice and experiences that overcome local problems, that have collective global significance when we overcome them sustainably. Now, Ewan Bush gave us a great overview of his post as the Garve and District Community Development Company to speak about the work going on to support Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate action in our region. Focusing on 3 themes: home energy, community transport, and community energy. Great work going on, but some real barriers to progress due to the way funding is structured and policy restrictions that are applied. Maybe that's an area that you can look at within the biosphere. The challenge in seeking to overcome the reliance on a linear supply chain that has resulted in the distortion of how communities work with no need to think about where their food comes from was discussed in that second session. Well, the wider degenerative land use and sea exploitation, I did get it in there, that's removing and then simplifying land cover as monoculture or industrial fishing, leaves a stripped back, marginalized wilderness edge to the marine protection area. What we can describe as the last wild harvest, and a significant part of the heritage that we overlook, especially in that littoral zone, as I flagged up, which is where the real wilderness is still available. We heard from Joe and Stephen, some amazing speakers this morning, bringing local initiatives that bring hope and real evidence that local production and consumption have community benefits that can be complementary to life in Westeros and result in joy and slow hope towards an alternative land use that sees permanent land cover as a solution to regenerate our ecosystems, complement the repeopling of land. A proposal I first came across when introduced to Frank Fraser-Darley's 1955 classic of the West Highland Survey that's been recently built upon by Jim Hunter, who we heard about from the University of Highlands Islands with his concepts of repeopling, where the concepts of rewilding need to be complemented with biodiverse landscapes and seascapes that are enriched through local embodied culture. We live together in community, learning from the rewilding that was first explored by Frans Vera in the Netherlands and made so famous through studying the ancient oak pasture of Windsor Great Park. I was involved in that project as well, and then applying them into the restoration landscapes that we hear about at Knepp Castle in Kent. It's not necessarily the model which can be rolled out everywhere. And today's session seems to share a vision for a mosaic landscape, not a mapping exercise that we imposed from someplace else, that places local people at the heart of the discussion and subsequent actions that need restoration of landscape and restoration of local ecology. What should be clear to all of us who share an interest in being human in the 21st century is that we need our social system to work in balance with the underlying ecosystem that supports it. In short, we need to learn to thrive within the limits of the Earth ecosystem. Gross domestic product is not a measure of ecosystem success, but stands to trace the unsustainable use of natural resources to create wealth. This is a creative use of a metric, money, that benefits a few people at the expense of many. But we can also imagine a new utopian vision that allows us all to complement, not compete for resources, invest in regenerative practices and relearn to join up the threads of life that connect us all. As an anthropologist, Tim Ingold's is obviously one of the people that influences me because I've popped him in here a few times. He suggests that we need to learn to follow the line that connects us all, a learning out with ourselves rather than a knowledge retained within our heads, to embody the life our own line lives in the matrix we share with the community we live within. Such a two-eyed way of seeing this world and valuing our place within it requires us to embody our own journey in this landscape, an experience that is more closely aligned to the former indigenous cultures that inhabited it. As we learn from Stephen in Loch Arbor, we can learn about success and failure of the past while looking to the present and embracing the best of the current to become better stewards of this place in the future. A place where people live sustainably, work, enjoy, visit, or can value from afar like me. After all, it's my observation that the spaces we value and protect as named places evolve through the actions and reactions of people and their environment. So we need to be clear of the vision we seek to enable here, which begins with sharing ideas, exploring the art of the possible, encouraged again by Joe Allen this morning, learning from the past As Ruth Levitas advocates, using utopia as a method to stretch further than you would otherwise dare to dream, as I heard in the breakout room workshops from you all, with passion and bold ambition from the sustainable change that you spoke about. Today, I witnessed you leaving the baggage at the door as we explored the path to a better place together, where the Biosphere Reserve is not a beacon in a degraded world, but a node connecting the global human ecology through a sustainable, regenerative world as we learn to live sustainably together. So I leave you with the final thoughts that were shared by Jean, Mathieu, Joanna, and Kaska, that we continue to harness the potential to promote and engage in conversation as we look to provide sustainable solutions and enable transition, for example, to active travel and shared transport, rather than rely on what we've got used to in our own cars, enabling the ripple effect by making the time to spend more quality time together in your community, maybe becoming a facilitator or participating in it as a climate cafe host, because this is only the start of our sharing stories together, which are enhanced in their ripples and will be grounded by those of you with your feet firmly on the ground rather than in the clouds like me. So good luck. I wish you well with all the success in the journey ahead. I also look forward to seeing you all at some time in the future to learn more and witness the continuation of sustainable community development that you're progressing together for people and for planet. Can I thank you all?